Okay, what's going on, guys? I've coached thousands of students over the years, and I wanted to go over some of the most common mistakes that you may find yourself in. I actually do this on my Patreon series, normally with a tactical board, just to show you things. But I thought I'll actually make it for this video over here, a theory kind of video. Now, the first thing I would say defensively is a big common mistake that people make, and it all starts with sometimes some of the most simplest things. Now, I know people are going to say it depends on connection and so on. But one of the biggest mistakes I see is, let's say your opponent has the ball. And let's say this is the most simplest example, okay? Let's say the ball is getting played from, let's say, their CDM or their centre mid to the striker. The biggest issue that I see and why people struggle defensively is because they switch too late. What people do is they switch the ball when it's already traversing or when the ball is at the player's feet. Now, if you're controlling player number 6 and the pass is being made, people, they try to recover. You need to know when to just switch. If you know you're nowhere near the ball, if your opponent's players over there, then it makes sense to can still control your CDM because you can try to run backwards and you can run back in time. But if you know you're on no man's land and you're between two players and you're cutting a passing lane, as soon as the ball leaves the feet, that is roughly the time that you should be lastly switching. But the problem is that's where everyone is trying to do it. Well, everyone's realistically, they normally switch about here. So when your opponent gets the ball, you've now switched from player number 6 to player number 3. And what's also important as well, with player number 6, if you hold your left analog stick, let's say to the bottom right, let's just say, for example, you're holding it to the bottom right, okay? When you then switch to player number 3, you then have to change your left analog stick direction. And that is how sometimes you might push a bit forward and your opponent can get in behind. Or sometimes what's also commonly known as the ball gets to the player's feet and your opponent's already dictated which way they're going before you've even selected your defender. So the best tip I can advise you is switch earlier. Even if you switch to the wrong player, it doesn't matter. It's better to switch earlier because remember, the L1 switch is your safety net. So even if you right stick switch to the wrong person, the L1 button will save you. So as soon as you see that white cursor move and you see that ball leaving the player's feet, that is your cue to switch, because by the time you actually switch and by the time you press the button and it actually works inside the game, the ball is probably going to switch at this point. At least you have a fraction of a second to control player number 3 and then defend that situation. So switching is the most important thing. You got to switch early. One of the biggest, most underrated skills in defending is not only positioning, but it's switching. So that's one of the main thing. The second one, which is such a common one, but I see so many times, people always ask me, what's the difference between an elite player and a Division 4 player? Yeah, you can argue the switching in a few things, but sometimes it's just the utter basics. You know how many times I see players running out with a centre back? Where I see this the most when people are losing 1-0. This is why in a tactical layout, I always say, start with a defensive formation and more progressive form and progressively go up. It's no point trying to start with an ultra attacking formation because you're going to be overly aggressive. This game, you cannot be overly aggressive. You cannot. My biggest skill was running out with a centre back. Obviously, this depends on your level. When you get to a certain level, you can run out with your centre backs, you can use teammate contain to cover, and you can be aggressive. Even with fullback or centre back, I cannot do that because the game does not allow it. It punishes you for running out with your centre back. So if you can't defend that way, there's no benefit. People say, they just mean you're running out. Oh no, I know that you're running out with centre back. No, it's small things. It's when the ball comes to your opponent's feet, is that you step forward instead of holding your line. That step forward is just enough for another player to run in behind or for your opponent to then make a skill move or something to get into that space. If you're not sure, I have a rule. With your defender, you always control your defender. You either move left to right. So when I mean left to right, as in you move like this or you move backwards. You never move forward. If you move forward, you only want to move if you're absolutely safe. And that kind of ties into the second point. Is spam the tackle button. You know advanced defending when it came out? So many players, they lost their skill. It's not because they made mistakes. It's because they kept thinking advanced defending, they can get away with using bruiser and smashing into someone. And they just forgot it's about basics. Everyone that stayed on classic defending, they maintained their defending and then they use advanced defending after to bridge the gap. Everyone that went to advanced defending now, half people I see, they say, oh no, I use advanced defending, it's amazing. I see their gameplay, I see the most basic mistake. They think they can go and beat someone in a 1v1 race by barging someone, as opposed to running where the ball's going to be. They try to run and try to cut the player out and then they get taken. So these are all small things. The tackle button should only be used when there's a clear chance of you winning the ball, as in that's the balls in the front of your opponent. If your opponent takes a touch away, that is not your reason to tackle. So many players like to chase the ball and try to make a tackle, and then it easily get taken behind. You don't believe me? Go look at your own gameplay back. You'll be shocked to see. Even sometimes you don't realize this, because when you're inside the game, you get frustrated. You might lose a game, lose a goal, and sometimes you don't see. Even sometimes I make these mistakes when I'm frustrated. Everyone does. But the key thing is notice it in your gameplay, and you'll see that's the best way to improve. Always look at your gameplay. You don't need a coach. You don't need someone like me. Of course, if we don't have time, you can always get a coach like me. But you can always analyze this yourself. It's only if you can't figure out those mistakes yourself, then you go getting coached. That's my logic anyway. It's always best to learn it yourself. Only if you're stuck, then go get a coach, because coaching is pretty expensive if you think about it as well. Another one is defend the angle towards goal. This is the most common mistake. When people are defending, you have to imagine there's a line between the goal and the player, okay? And that is going to be the direct angle of a shot. If you're standing in the middle, and this is what I like to call my being a wall methodology. Imagine you're a wall in a free kick, okay? There's a wall. That is your job as a defender. Your job is not to go out and tackle the ball. Have a look at some of the best defenders in the world. They will tackle when it's a clear chance, but their job is to, if the opponent is going to take a shot, they have to take it on their weaker foot, or they're going to take a less of a chance. So when you're defending, you have to position yourself in front of the goal. You basically want your opponent to pass the ball away. You actually want this. Because if you move out of the way and try to get the ball, your opponent's got a clear shot towards goal, especially inside the box. So you ideally want your opponent to pass the ball back. That's why on a top tier level, all top tier defending, people think, oh, you can just run inside the box and score. No, you have to learn to recycle the ball, because it's kind of like a puzzle. You pass the ball on to player number 2. Has your opponent now switched to player number 3 early, like I mentioned earlier? Has they switched in time? If they haven't, then you can go and exploit that. So it's more like a puzzle. So it's more like your opponent gets the ball. You have to then just mark up the defending angle towards goal. One of my easiest things to remember is that's the goal, that's the player. Just put yourself in between, okay? Give yourself a bit of a gap. Don't go too close, because if you go too close, someone can do a 1-2 and you could get in trouble. So don't go too close to the player, and equally don't stand too far back, because you stand too far back, A, they can run at you and they can probably do like a skill move, and B, it kind of comes in time with not running too far back as well, because the further you, this is another mistake I see. People, they hear what I say and they think, oh, Neil's saying that, let me run backwards. But they run so far backwards that you give your opponent space to score. You basically want to just give them basically, imagine there's another player in between your player like that. You want to give them a tiny bit of space. Enough where if they move in any direction with high velocity, like a step over skill move, you have enough of a reaction time to get back in time. So stay close, but not so close where you want to be body to body, and not so far where you're basically giving them space to run into you. Remember, if they run into you, let them. You win the ball. People always forget this. You don't need to press a tackle button. Let them run into you. The tackle button can help guarantee you win the ball, but just let them run into you or tackle the ball. That's why even when I teach on the page, I say, look, don't tackle. Let them run into you first. Then when you learn the positioning, and that's 10-10, then you can start introducing tackling. You don't need to do it, but when you make a tackle, the player goes into animation and it moves out of the way. So don't put yourself in that situation. Then it comes to something that's quite similar as well with defending, is player choice. Now I know, for example, crossing and we know like cutbacks, especially early on this year, you have to be wary about where the ball is on the pitch. I'll give you an example. Okay, let's just say we're going to use a standard 4. You know what? I was going to say 4-2-3-1. Maybe we just use, actually in this example, it's a 4-2-3-1. Let's say the ball is over here, for example. Use player number 11, but let's say the ball goes, for example, from here to player number 2. Okay. Now at this situation, you have 10 players behind the ball. You can count 11 if you want to, but I'm not going to count the goalkeeper, because the goalkeeper is always behind the ball, realistically speaking, unless the goalkeeper comes out. The ball will go to player number 2. Now, people, they feel like I'm going to run forward a little bit, then switch to player number 8, and then go apply pressure to number 2. Now, what you do then is you break your defense up for no reason. Now, you only want to commit a player, and you only want to lose a player if your opponent beats you. And what I mean by that is, let's say, for example, you go to apply pressure, and the opponent does I call it a 1-3-2, where the ball goes around you. Then you have to go to player number 8, and that is because player 11 is too far away. But let's say, for example, the ball gets played to player number 2, and you're running, for example, like here, and player number 2 has the ball. Then run back with player number 11. you don't need to switch to player number 2, because that way you keep defensive integrity and you can afford to be risky. You can take a risk, you can take a slide tackle, you can try to do the tackle button, and then at least you've got your 2 CDMs in shape. Where this happens worse is with the 4-4. This is why the 4-4-2 is very hard to play, because people, they see this is why it's so easy to break down a 4-4-2. That's why people with the 4-3-2-1, top tier players, people use it, they're laughing, because a lot of top tier players, they know that people, when they're defending, they be overly aggressive with one player, they can make a pass in behind, and that's it. Then they run out with their CDM, and that's it. Most people have got 2 strikers. Then you can see it's a 2v2 if they get in behind the defensive line. If they got a player in between, it's basically a 3v3 in this area, a 3v1, and then it's a 3v3 up against these players when you introduce those players in. So don't break your defensive integrity. That's the last thing you want to do. So if you want to run back, the same thing applies to the wing. Let's say you're playing on the wing, right? Let's just say, for example, here your opponent's got the ball, and let's say he's got the ball down the wing, okay? This is a common example that I see. Your opponent does a 1-2, and let's say, for example, the fullback makes that run going forward. A lot of players, for example, here, they have the urge to then run out with their CDM, or the worst case, player number, the left back, player number 5. You don't want to be doing that. You want to ideally try to run back with number 10 first, and that way, if the left back is also joining, or the right back in this case, with the winger, at least then you can have a 2v2 situation. The last thing you want to do is have your left attack in mid there. Now you're going to say to me, hang on, Neil, isn't the job of comeback and defense the instruction for the players to come back? Well, they're going to come back within reason. They're not going to come back and defend for you. So when the ball is over there and you see, let's say the ball gets switched. Let's say a common example is a ball gets switched and then the ball gets traversed to this area over there. Then right stick switch to your left attack in mid and tuck that player in. And that way you got that safety net. So your CDM is still covering the strikers, because as soon as you bring this player out, you're going to create that gap. And that is how players concede, is by creating unnecessary gaps. It sounds so simple, but maybe when you watch your own gameplay back, you'll see this is such a common big mistake. Maybe because I understand that logically you think to choose, and I think people they teach to say choose the closest defender within reason. But you want to avoid double up. The worst thing you want to do is apologies for that. The worst thing you want to do is a 2v2 situation. But anyway, that is probably like some of the top 5 mistakes I would say that a lot of players make. I've coached thousands of students and people that I've seen on my FIFA school as well. Don't forget, you want to join my FIFA school, my Patreon school, FC24 school, should I say. Patreon.com/Neil, guys. Links down in the description, where we go over loads of this, show you theory and gameplay footage as well. We analyze it to show you where you can change and how you made those mistakes. Patreon link is down below in the description. If you don't get it after 1 month, we'll refund your money as a Neil Guys guarantee. Thanks for watching. Take it easy, and of course, I'll catch you next time. Peace out.